So thank you very much for coming. The topic today is activate your metadata to empower innovation. And let's jump right in. So why does metadata actually matter? I borrowed this quote from Gartner. It's a fairly recent report, and it basically says, in other words, that only 10% of time are spent on actual innovation. 90% of time is actually spent on data preparation, and a large portion of that is actually addressing metadata issues. Missing metadata, inferring metadata, understanding where the data is coming from, where it is going to, am I using the right metadata, right? So 90%, that's a really absurd amount of time that we should be spending on these tasks instead of innovation. The outlook for 2024 is actually talking about how to fix it, right? And it basically says that if we adopt very aggressive measures for metadata analysis, organizations should be able to speed up the delivery by as much as 70%, which would be really great. So now let's take a look how to actually do it, how to really use the metadata to achieve this by 2024 or ideally even sooner. So first of all, I would love to talk about where we are at right now, what we do with the metadata, how we collect them, and so on. And then move actually to using them actively. So if you look at what our businesses are doing, what all of our businesses are doing, we're basically constantly trying to bring new products, new services to our customers, to better understand what they need, how they use our services, to make sure that they are happy, that they stay, right? And in order to actually do that, we continuously analyze more data. We use new methods to analyze the data, right? And we're actually applying new technologies and methods to do that. And as a result, as you can see, the environment is basically constantly growing. And it's growing on the technology level, basically, which is, I would say, the smaller part. But more importantly, on the data volumes, variety of the data that you're processing, but most importantly, on the algorithms that you're doing. Even if we change the technology, the underlying technology, we still try to keep the algorithms, what we do with the data, right? We want to do more, we want to get more insights. And all of this basically makes it much harder and harder over time to implement any sort of changes, to do anything, any extra innovation, to migrate to cloud, right? And the reason is that we're basically creating, by doing more analysis, we're actually creating these little dependencies between the systems. And the dependencies is what makes it hard then, right? Because once we have the dependencies, we cannot simply change that one thing that we are interested in, but we actually need to make sure that we won't break anything, right? We need to make sure that we contact the people who are using it, and so on and so on. So the dependencies are really the issue. If you look at how we are using the metadata currently, or what we are actually doing with the metadata currently, we're basically creating these large glossaries, right? We are collecting the metadata, we are cataloging our data assets, we are creating inventories, we are creating business glossaries, we are maybe mapping the data models, right? We are mapping the processes. But even with all of this information, we have these huge libraries or catalogs of metadata that we do not use actively. We let the metadata to sit there and work with them only when needed. So if we identify an issue, we go back and try to figure it out what caused it, right? If we are about to make a change in the system, migrate to cloud, for example, that's a great example, we actually go back to these catalogs and try to figure it out what we actually need to do. So all of this use is very reactive, right? And that's definitely the issue here. So what can we actually do to use metadata more actively, to let metadata really work for us? Actually, maybe one step back. If you think about it, this collection process of metadata and cataloging is quite logical, because first you sort of need to learn to walk before you run, right? So you first need to at least get some metadata to understand what you're really dealing with. But now that we have it, we need to actually take the next step. So what does it really mean to activate metadata or to have active metadata? It really means that we need to actually embed the metadata into our existing processes and augment the processes from the very beginning. So it's not reactive use, but the processes from the very beginning need to be working with the metadata, need to be utilizing the metadata actively. And that means that over time, some of the processes will become completely metadata driven and maybe even replace the human logic or human decision making by providing suggestions or providing alerts or even solutions to the issues that you're dealing with. So maybe to be more concrete and to relate it to something that we're all familiar with, let's take a look at the map. You can think of a map as a metadata, right? You can use it to find a route from point A to B, and you can simply follow it to get from point A to B, right? But that's really passive use because the map is not really doing anything for you on its own. You are using the map to actually get from point A to point B. So what if we actually activate the map? What if we activate the metadata that we have? And the way to activate the map is your navigation app, for example, right? So it's still a map, but what does it actually do for us? It actually shows us a turn-by-turn directions, right? These directions are based on our current position. If you make a wrong turn, it automatically recalculates the route and shows you new instructions, right? You don't have to ask for it. The navigation simply does it for you. And I could go further. It takes into account the current traffic. So we are not basing the decision about which route we take only on the map itself, but we actually use additional metadata to enrich it and to make a better decision, right? If you have your schedule in your calendar with, I don't know, Google, Apple, you actually get an alert or notification that it's time for you to leave to make it on time, considering the current traffic. So all of this information is metadata working actively for you and doing something for you without you having to take the action first, right? You're not taking the action. The action is taken by the metadata on its own, or by the process that actually enables that. And that's actually exactly what we need to do with the metadata that we have, with the catalogs, with the data lineage, with the data privacy type of information. We need this metadata that we have to work for us, to augment the existing processes. So how do we actually activate the metadata that we have, right? Well, as you've seen with the example with the map, we can only improve the map so far, right? The map will still be a map. The navigation is something completely different that just uses the map. So that's definitely the first thing to consider, that if we're looking at only improving the existing processes that we have, it may not get us that far. It's definitely a good first step to do something, but we actually need to think bigger. We need to think how to change the process, how to digitalize the process, how to make it truly metadata driven from the very beginning. And that may be actually quite painful, especially for some organizations that are used to do things in some set ways, right? But it's really the only way to truly activate the metadata and get the value from them that it offers. So first of all, definitely review the existing process. We need to identify the gaps or proactive measures that can be taken. So what can be done differently? What are we doing manually? What are we doing in a reactive manner that could be handled by the metadata? Basically to get answers to the questions that before we actually ask the questions, right? How we can be alerted without having to go back and check if something has changed. all of these things should be embedded into our existing processes, and they need to be automated so that it's not, again, a manual effort by a person that needs to be taken, but it is actually something that the process or the system helps us to do. Obviously, having the metadata itself, or the metadata that we have in the current state, may be good, but it's definitely not enough. We need to do advanced analytics on the metadata to, for example, identify changes to be able to get notifications. We probably need to set up some rules or have machine learning or artificial intelligence to maybe even identify these rules based on the patterns that are happening in the system, based on the changes that we see in the metadata. There can be rules and alerts set up or identified automatically. And then, and that's probably the most challenging task, is to really integrate the metadata into our existing processes. And the reason why I'm saying that it's probably the most challenging one is because it needs to be really automated. We need to change the process from the very ground. We need to have a maybe new system, maybe existing system, but we need to have some system that actually does it for us, because metadata on its own won't do it just by themselves. So from here on, we can use APIs, some messaging, some embedding widgets or something like that to the existing processes, to the existing applications that will get us the alerts, notifications, suggestions, or solutions. Basically in the same way as the navigation app does, right? It automatically recalculates the route when we make a wrong turn. If we make a wrong turn with distributing, let's say, PII type of information into a system that is not certified to handle PII information, we want to be notified about it, or even better, we want the system to prevent that action in the first place, right? So let's take a look at a few examples on how to actually activate metadata for specific processes. And as I'm with MANTA, I will use data lineage as a specific example, because data lineage is quite critical. Before I actually jump in, anyone over here who's not familiar with the concept of data lineage, or who think that it would be worth to get a little bit of refresher? Everyone's good? Or everyone's scared to raise the hand? All right. So data lineage is basically providing you an information about your data pipelines. It tells you where the data is coming from, where it is used, where it is stored, and who uses it. But also, maybe even more importantly, it tells you what happens to the data along the way, what kind of transformation you apply. Do you do any sort of data cleansing? Do you somehow aggregate or consolidate the data? What do you actually really do with it? And in other words, it really captures the dependencies within the system, but also across the systems. So let's say that you have a particular data asset, and you defined a data quality metric for it. And when you actually measure the DQ score, it comes up at 55%, which, depending on what it is, without any context, we don't know whether it's good or bad. But it gives us some indication, and 55 is probably not that great, right? So what do you actually need to do to investigate this data quality issue? Right now, you're looking at just one asset, one table, or whatever it is, with customer data, maybe your sales data, whatever it is. What do you need to do to actually address the data quality issue and to really assess what it means? Well, first of all, you need to get the understanding about where the data came from, right? Where the data quality issue came from. Did it come from a single source or from multiple sources? Or is this the point of collecting the metadata in the first place? So you need to really get the information about where the data is coming from. And let's say that it came from a single source. So that's definitely the first thing that the metadata could give you right away. Then we actually need to understand where this poor quality data is actually being used. Oh, I'm actually getting a battery running low message over here on the laptop. Do we have power? I'm getting a message that says computer battery is low. So I'm sorry. The next thing that we need to understand is really where that metadata is actually being used. Is it being used in some sort of important reports? Does it mean that potentially some wrong decisions have been made on low quality data, right? Who is actually impacted, right? Do we need to review it with the regulators where we provided incorrect reports, or have we made a business decision on incorrect data, right? So who is actually impacted? So that's, again, a piece of information that we need to understand, and typically we actually look for it only in a reactive mode, only once we find that the data quality issue. So this is, again, something that could very easily feed back to the data quality score, and the data quality score could be affected not just by the quality of the data itself, but also by its use, right? How important the use of the data is. And maybe from the larger perspective, we originally identified the data quality issue somewhere here in the middle. But as the data quality issue actually comes from the very source, there may be other assets and other uses impacted as well. And that, again, adds quite a different perspective to the data quality issue as well. And in fact, the data quality score then should be revisited considering these uses as well. So in other words, now I just explained how we would handle the data quality issue traditionally, and what metadata could do for us to actually to actually assess the data quality issue on its own in more holistic manner on its own before we actually dive in manually, right? All of this information you can actually find out in our business glossaries, who uses the actual data. You can find the information about the data origins and data uses in your data Lineage platform or in your catalog platform. All of this is available. It's just sitting there and not doing anything for us. Another case could be an impact analysis. So impact analysis is basically a process that is used at the beginning when you're making a change to assess what will be the impact of the change, right? To understand the scope, to understand what teams need to be involved, to understand how much effort it's going to be, to understand the timeline, right? So the impact analysis, in other words, as it is something that happens at the very beginning, is a very important step, because if you get it wrong, everything else will sort of shift as well. So let's say that we need to make a change in the system over here in the middle. And on purpose, I actually highlighted just part of that system, because typically we're not replacing the system as a whole, but we're making a specific change to the system, to one small part. So having the understanding that these parts are affected is good, but it's not good enough, because it's too generic, it's too broad, right? We need to understand in more detail which part of the system is affected, whether it's one asset, 10 assets, 100 assets, which reports are affected, which end users are affected, and it actually may, in the end, not be necessarily all the end users, it may be just some of them. So if you have the information available at the very beginning about, on detail level, about how big that change is, what it means for the upstream, for the downstream systems, you can actually much better assess all of the next steps and plan all the next steps. First of all, you really scope it, you get the budget right, you do the planning right, design, and so on and so on. And in the end, the benefit is definitely that you get the whole implementation much faster compared to doing it manually without the metadata helping you. And the key here is really that the metadata is activated to give you the information at the very beginning in an automated way. Because this is exactly what the data scientists are spending time on. They are trying to figure out where the data came from. Is it the right data? If I use it, can I use it for a specific case? All of these steps are taking so much time that they are wasting time on data preparation instead of the actual innovation and doing the analytics itself. So now, how data lineage or MANTA fits in to make it more concrete. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have the metadata available, but metadata on its own will not do the work for us. We need something that will help activate the metadata. And something that will help you activate the metadata is a data lineage platform, data catalog in the future that actually has the information available and allows you to capture the metadata on its own, ideally even discover it, set up the rules and alerting mechanism that can be used by the processes that you're building or that you already have, like data quality, data privacy initiatives, impact analysis, all of this to be actually enabled and integrated. And the integration can be quite loose through some sort of APIs or notification mechanism, or much tighter where you actually want to display, for example, the data flow or metadata diagram within the tool itself for analysts to be able to review it or review the results in more details, the results that are provided in an automated fashion. So this is something that is needed to actually really enable that activation on its own. So just to summarize, here are a few takeaways, and maybe to take a slightly different or bigger picture look at the whole situation. I was thinking that it's actually very interesting to see startups and small companies, how they actually disrupt the market that is already well established, right? If you see a small new bank that is coming and is getting clients from a larger bank, these small companies are typically able to move very fast. And the reason is that they do not have that baggage that the large banks do. They do not have many systems. They do not have the dependencies between the systems. So these small businesses are very flexible at making changes. You can basically turn immediately. You can change the direction 180 degrees from one day to another, right? A huge bank simply cannot do that. And basically, if you take this perspective, over the time, if this small organization is successful, it keeps growing, which means that it keeps adding new services, new products, processes more data, builds more internal systems, and it's basically getting into the position of that large organization, which is not very flexible. And on the other hand, the large organization, basically the only way it can get more flexible is to activate the metadata to remove that baggage that they have carried over the years and to become more flexible, right? And so with the active metadata management, the idea is that you want to keep that flexibility. If you're a small organization, you want to think forward, and you want to build the metadata into your processes so that you keep that flexibility, that you're not stuck at one point that you're not flexible anymore, that it's hard for you to make changes. And for large organizations, you cannot get rid of that 50-year, 30-year baggage that you have. It's simply impossible. You need to keep the systems. You can maybe modernize them, but even then modernization takes years, and it's sort of constant, right? So for large organizations, the only way to become more flexible, able to faster react to changes, able to deliver new products, new services to the clients faster, is to let the metadata work for them actively to really change the processes from the ground, not just digitalize them, but change them from the ground and build on a metadata-driven approach. And that's it for me. So we should have some time for questions, if there are any.